Greetings and thanks for tuning in. I'm Maura Wieler from Lamoille South Supervisory Union, and I'd like to welcome you to our 4th episode of our PLP Pathways webinar series. I'd like to thank Orca Media for letting us film the show in their studio.
Hi, and I'm Don Taylor. I teach at Main Street Middle School in Montpelier. I'm also a contributor to PLP Pathways. I'd like to thank the Middle Grades Collaborative and the Taylor Institute for supporting PLP Pathways. And this afternoon, we're going to be talking a little bit about proficiency-based learning. These episodes that Maura and I film our conversations are typically based on the subject of our next webinar, and our next webinar will be Thursday, December 14th at 3:30 p.m. You can watch PLP Pathways webinars and our TV episodes on YouTube. They're live streamed, and you can also tune in anytime to see what we're talking about regarding Act 77 and personalization. So today we're going to be talking about proficiency-based learning, and Maura has quite a bit of experience with that, and a lot of teachers are asking questions around the state, so we're kind of going to do a question and answer session, and then again we'll go into much more detail on this on the 45-minute webinar that's happening on Thursday, December 14th.
But before we get too far into today's show, we want to make sure you know how to stay connected to PLP Pathways. You can visit our site, follow us on Twitter, and keep tabs on the project through our blog. We'll show you these again at the end of the show.
So a key piece of Act 77 is the move to proficiency-based learning. In a proficiency-based learning system, the focus is on students' demonstration of desired learning outcomes. Included in that, there are clear expectations for learning. Students' progress is measured and supported. Assessment is meaningful and a positive learning experience for students. Students are receiving timely feedback on a regular basis, and personalized learning opportunities are available to students. If you go to the AOE website and you look up proficiency-based learning, there's a lot of information, there's a lot of educational language, and in my discussions with teachers, I wouldn't say confusion, but there's not sort of a universal understanding of what proficiency-based learning is all about. There's a lot of different variations, and one of the things that PLP Pathways is designed to do is to just help teachers wend their way through these different initiatives. So I guess my first question to you is, why is proficiency-based learning happening now, and why are we being asked to transition to this new way of learning and this new way of assessing student performance?
So I think the big reasons behind this is there have been huge advances in understanding how the brain learns in cognitive science. And so based on what we know about the brain, proficiency-based learning is really a move to match what we know about how the brain learns and making sure that students are learning in that fashion. And so there are some changes that need to be made. Part of that is the personalization of the learning, using real-world, authentic performance assessment measures, shifts from this idea of seat time, of you are a 10th grader until you've earned so many credits, and then you're an 11th grader, to really looking at mastery of concepts. And so all of these pieces really align with what we've learned about the brain over the past few decades. And then the other piece of it is really there are new technology tools that are available to us that are helping us to personalize the learning. And there are also skills, there's some transferable skills that we're able to capture using technology in a new way. And so it really is a blending of these new tech skills and also our understanding of the brain that's really pushing us to realize that we need to change as a system to really make sure that our students are college and career ready when they graduate from high school.
Yeah, and I would add too, I hate to say it, it's a cliche, but the world has changed. But
Yes.
in terms of technology and what kids have access to, that's dramatically different than it was 10 years ago. And proficiency-based learning is attempting to capture some of those opportunities and bring those into the classroom. And on top of that, I think we need to be creating critical thinkers for the 21st century. So I believe that's where the proficiency-based learning push comes in, and also the recognition that a lot of kids are not engaged in school, are dropping out, or are entering college and not prepared. So those are the background reasons for it. I guess my question, if you're a teacher and you're saying, where do I start? In your role as curriculum and technology specialist coordinator at Lamoille, what would you say would be 2 objectives or 2 key pieces that you would recommend for teachers?
The first key piece is becoming really clear on what you're expecting of students. So what those objectives are. We call them proficiencies. They are our standards. So when we talk about personalizing learning, it's really hard to personalize learning if your students don't know what you're expecting. And so unless you're really clear on what it is, what that standard is that you want your students to achieve, it becomes very hard for the student and you to find a personalized way for them to achieve it. So the first is becoming really clear about what it is you're expecting of your students. So that would be one key piece. The next piece is really to think about how you're designing your assessments and how you are capturing student learning and evidence of growth. And so once again, it's hard to build an assessment, an authentic performance assessment, if you don't know what you're expecting students to be able to do or know at the end of the learning experience. And so if you're really clear on what the proficiency is, it's really, that's when you can start thinking about how you design your assessment opportunities that is going to collect evidence that's going to help you and the student talk about their growth towards meeting those standards over time. And so I would say that those would be, if we're talking strictly about the proficiency-based curriculum lens, those would be two pieces that if I was talking to a teacher who was just starting, those would be the 2 places I would start.
So I'm hearing you say that know your objective or know your standards, and I don't think that's new for teachers.
No.
But the other key piece is the assessment. So when you're designing in a backwards manner, so you know what your standard is, should you also be very, very clear about what your assessment should be? Or I guess as a teacher, I'm thinking, okay, here are the standards, but I might have a variety of assessments to measure that standard, right? And so moving forward, are you recommending that we have a rubric, a proficiency rubric that we give to kids and say you can meet this proficiency in a number of different ways?
Yes.
So again, my planning now is I know the standard, I know what my assessment is going to be. I haven't quite identified the method of the assessment, but I've identified what's proficient with distinction based on that objective. And that's where you're recommending that people start.
Yeah. If thinking about the assessment method can sometimes be difficult. And so another way to think about is what would different types of evidence be that would let me know that a student is proficient? So what are some of the things that I might be doing? And so a great example, if you are teaching kindergarten, a classic kindergarten one is by the end of the first trimester, kindergartners really need to be able to count to 20. That's a hard thing to maybe capture an authentic assessment of, but thinking about how are ways that you can capture a student being able to fluently count to 20. So it might be them working with blocks and grouping things into 20. Maybe you conferred with a student and so you're doing a quick note to yourself, but really thinking through how are you going to provide opportunities for students to show you that they're meeting that standard.
And I keep, while you're talking, I'm saying, boy, that's why we have the PLP, right? Because the PLP can capture a wide range of these pieces of evidence demonstrating their proficiency, and it no longer has to be a hard copy test, or it no longer has to be the same assessment for all the kids, right? But I also would urge teachers, this is something that you need to think deeply about because it really is a transition for teachers, and it can be conceptually difficult. And in order to make it effective, I think teachers are going to have to spend a lot of time considering the proficiencies. So last question, if you had some resources that you would recommend to help teachers understand proficiency and either continue implementing it or perfect their implementation, what would some of those resources be?
I think the Agency of Education has some great resources. The Great Schools Partnership also has some really wonderful webinar series, especially if you're grappling with some of the definitions and trying to get comfortable with some of the language. They have some really great, we talked about learning scales before, so proficiency-based learning scale. they have some really wonderful guides, guides that really walk through the criteria, because until you build that scale, it's hard to imagine the different types of evidence a student might have. So although we're talking about the curriculum design, unless you have thought through what you're expecting kids to do, it's hard to provide multiple opportunities and personalized opportunities to students. And so that really is at the basis. And as we're talking about these scales, they are very different from a rubric that we might have had before that was more about the frequency of something, whereas now it's about the skill development and the complexity. And so so the Great Schools Partnership has some really great resources about that.
Okay. A lot of these are linked on the PLP Pathways website, and we'd encourage you to join us as we continue discussing Act 77, Proficiency-Based Learning tonight. It's also going to be the subject of our next webinar on Thursday, December 14th. We hope you join us at 3:30. Again, thanks to Orca Media, the Tarrant Institute, the Middle Grades Collaborative for supporting this work. I have a lot of questions still for Maura, but we'll continue this conversation, and we hope that you join us as we look to improve teaching and learning in Vermont. Thank you very much.